My son-in-law looked my daughter in the eye at her own birthday dinner and said, "We're not splitting the check with your father. He can pay for himself." My daughter nodded, didn't say a word, and I just sat there holding my coffee cup, watching the man I'd helped put through dental school decide I wasn't worth $22 worth of pasta. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, but when the check came, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope, and set it on the table. What happened next? I still think about it every time I drive past that restaurant. Before I tell you the rest, let me back up. My name is Lou Brennick. I'm 68 years old, retired postal worker, widower going on 4 years now. I live alone in the same house in Dayton, Ohio, that my wife Connie and I bought in 1987 for $83,000. The gutters need replacing. The water heater makes a sound I don't trust. But it's mine. Paid off, and for a long time, that felt like enough. My daughter's name is Tara. She's 41. Smart woman, sharp. She got that from her mother. She met her husband, Brendan, when they were both volunteering at a community health fair downtown, which, looking back, has a kind of cruel irony to it given how things turned out. Brendan is a cosmetic dentist, not the kind who fills cavities for kids on Medicaid, the kind with frosted glass doors and a Pandora playlist and a receptionist who calls you by your first name before you've even sat down. He does veneers mostly, whitening, the occasional smile makeover, whatever that means. He drives a German car. He uses words like curated and intentional to describe things like their kitchen renovation and their vacation schedule. I never disliked him, not at first. He was polite enough, remembered to shake my hand, remembered my coffee order the second time we met, which I thought was a good sign in a man. But there was always something, a smallness underneath the polish, the way he'd talk over Tara in front of company, the way he'd mention money without mentioning numbers, just enough to make sure you knew he had it. Connie saw it before I did. She told me 2 weeks before she passed, she was sharp until the end, my wife. She said, "Lou, that man loves the idea of Tara more than he loves Tara." I told her she was being unfair. I've thought about that conversation almost every day since. After Connie died, things changed. Slowly at first, the way water rises. You don't notice until you're already wet. The calls got shorter. The visits got further apart. Tara stopped coming by on Sundays the way she used to, when she'd bring a rotisserie chicken and we'd watch old game shows and talk about nothing important. Those Sundays were the best part of my week. Then Brendan got a new patient base out in Centerville, started working Saturdays, needed Tara to manage the front of house on weekends. The Sundays just stopped. I told myself it was fine. People get busy. Life gets complicated. I wasn't going to be the father who guilted his daughter over a standing lunch date. But then my back went out in January of last year. Herniated disc, L4, L5. I'd had trouble with it before, but this time it was bad. 3 weeks, where I couldn't stand up straight, couldn't drive, could barely get to the bathroom without grabbing the wall. I called Tara on a Tuesday afternoon. The call went to voicemail. I left a message. I said I wasn't doing great, that it might be good to have someone check in. She texted back 4 hours later. "So sorry, Dad. Crazy week. Brendan's receptionist quit. Can we talk this weekend? We didn't talk that weekend." I want to be fair. She didn't know how bad it was. I hadn't told her about the other thing yet, the thing I'd been sitting on since my appointment with Dr. Holler in November. Early stage Parkinson's. Not aggressive. Manageable, the doctor said. But progressive. Something that was going to need attention, medication, planning. Something that was going to require, eventually, the kind of help you can only get from people who love you. I hadn't told Tara because I didn't know how, and then the weeks kept passing, and not telling her became its own kind of habit. What I did tell her was that I wanted to take her out for her birthday, 41 years old. I knew she'd been stressed. The practice, Brendan's long hours, her own freelance bookkeeping work she'd picked up on the side. I wanted to do something nice, take her somewhere good, just the two of us, the way we used to do when she was young, before Brendan, before all of it. Just Dad and his girl. She said that sounded lovely. Then, 2 days before, she texted to let me know Brendan would be joining us. I said, of course. The restaurant was Brendan's choice. A steakhouse out in the Beaver Creek area. The kind of place with cloth napkins and a sommelier and no prices on the women's menu, if you can believe that's still a thing. I'd looked it up before we went. Entrees started at $42. I wore my good blazer. The charcoal one I'd bought for Connie's sister's retirement party 5 years ago. I'd had it dry cleaned the week before, just in case. I got there first and waited near the hostess stand. It was a Thursday evening, the 3rd week of March, the kind of night where winter is technically over, but no one's told Ohio yet. Cold, grey, the parking lot, still patchy with old snow along the curb lines. They pulled up in Brendan's car, the new one, the silver one. I watched them come through the door. Tara looked tired. She had that particular kind of tired that lives in the eyes, not just the body. She hugged me, and it was a real hug, whatever else was true about that night. My daughter loves me, I've never doubted that. Brendan shook my hand. Firm, the way he always did. Lou, good to see you. He was already scanning the dining room over my shoulder. We were seated in the middle of the restaurant. Nice table, white linen, a little candle in a glass holder. The waiter introduced himself as Chris. Young kid, probably in college. Serious face, like he was taking the job personally. Brendan ordered a bottle of wine without asking either of us. A Napa cab, $68. He and Tara each got a glass. I asked for iced tea. Brendan commented that it was a special occasion. I said iced tea was fine. Tara ordered the salmon. Brendan ordered the ribeye, the 14-ounce, and told Chris he wanted it Pittsburgh rare, which I've always thought is a way of ordering a steak that's designed mostly to impress the waiter. I ordered the chicken piccata. $34. Cheaper than either of theirs. For a while the conversation was fine. Tara told me about a bookkeeping client she'd picked up, a small brewery out in Yellow Springs. She seemed genuinely excited about it, and I was glad to hear that kind of excitement in her voice. Brendan talked about a patient, some local TV anchor who'd come in for a full smile restoration. He didn't name her, but it was clear he wanted credit for the discretion of not naming her. I asked Tara how she'd been sleeping. She used to have trouble sleeping, even as a kid. She said okay, mostly. Brendan said she needed to cut back on screen time before bed. Tara looked at her water glass. I asked about their plans for the summer. Brendan mentioned Portugal. 10 days, a rented villa outside Lisbon, some cooking class they were doing. Tara's first time in Europe. I remembered when she was 12, how she'd had a poster of the Eiffel Tower above her desk, how she'd said she was going to visit every country on the continent before she turned 30. She was 41 now. Portugal would be her first. I said that sounded wonderful. It was around the time the entrees arrived that things changed. The food came out. Beautiful plates, I'll give them that. And Brendan's whole posture shifted. Something loosened in him. I'd seen it before in men like him. The way a certain amount of wine and a certain quality of food makes them feel entitled to say whatever they'd been holding back. He started talking about the house. My house. Specifically, he started talking about what it was worth. He'd looked it up, apparently, just out of curiosity. The Zillow estimate was around $240, $245 given current comps in the neighborhood. He said this the way you might announce a sports score. Informational, casual. I set my fork down. Tara was looking at her salmon. He said it in the context of planning, which is a word people use when they want to talk about money without sounding crass. He said he and Tara had been thinking about the future, about what made sense logistically, about whether it was practical for me to keep maintaining a 3-bedroom house by myself at my age. He said, at your age, the way men say it when they mean something less kind. I said I was doing fine. He said, of course, but the house was a lot to manage, and the equity was just sitting there. Wouldn't it make more sense? And here he put on the careful face, the one designed to look like concern. Wouldn't it make more sense to liquidate, move somewhere more manageable, maybe a 55-plus community out in Springboro, and free up that capital for, the future? I asked whose future he meant. He picked up his wineglass. Tara still hadn't looked up from her plate. I didn't say anything else about it. I picked up my fork. I ate my chicken piccata, which was actually very good. And I thought about Connie, about what she'd said about this man, about how she'd understood something about him that I'd spent 4 years trying not to see. The check came about 20 minutes later. Chris set it in the center of the table, equidistant the way trained servers do. Brendan picked it up immediately. He looked at it, then set it back down, not in the center, but slightly toward me. Actually, he said, in the same tone he'd used to discuss my house, we should probably do this separately. You ordered for yourself, we ordered for ourselves. Easier to just split it that way. Tara said his name. Just his name, quietly. He talked over her. He said it wasn't personal, just practical. He said, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this many times, your dad can cover his own. We'll take care of ours. Not quite looking at me when he said it. Looking at the candle, or the middle distance somewhere behind my left shoulder. The way people look when they've said something they know is wrong but have decided to say anyway. Tara's jaw tightened. She was doing the thing she did when she didn't know what to do. Very still, very quiet, hands in her lap. She'd done the same thing at 8 years old when kids at school were mean. She'd learned somewhere along the way that stillness was safe. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her husband. Chris, the waiter, was standing off to the side, pretending to study the dessert display, and then I reached into my jacket pocket and I took out the envelope. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't make a speech. I just set it on the table, next to the check, and I said, I already took care of it. Brendan looked at the envelope. What? I called ahead this afternoon, I said. Spoke with the manager, the whole bill, dinner, the wine, everything. It's already settled. You don't owe anything. Tara looked up then, finally looked up. I said, that's what I came here to tell you. Brendan started to say something about that not being necessary, about how I didn't need to do that, about how they were happy to. I'm sick, I said, and the table went quiet. Not the performative quiet of someone pausing for effect, real quiet. The kind that follows words that can't be taken back. I told them about the Parkinson's. I said it plainly, the way Dr. Holler had said it to me. Early stage, manageable for now, progressive over time. I told them I'd known since November. I told them I hadn't said anything because I hadn't known how, and then not saying anything had become easier than saying it, and now 4 months had gone by, and I was sitting across from my daughter at her birthday dinner, watching her husband discuss my home equity and decide I could pay for my own chicken. Tara's eyes filled. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. I kept going. I said I'd used the money from Connie's life insurance to pay for this dinner, including the wine. Not because I had extra money. My pension from the postal service was $31,000 a year, and between property taxes and utilities and the medication copays that were about to get considerably more complicated, $31,000 didn't go as far as people thought. I'd used that money because I'd wanted one good evening with my daughter. That was all I'd come for. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came here because you're 41 years old today and you're my kid and I wanted to celebrate that. That's it. Brendan set his wineglass down. Something had shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. I don't know that guilt was something he had easy access to, but recalibration. The look of a man who has just been shown a variable he hadn't accounted for. Tara was crying quietly, not sobbing, just the kind of tears that come when something you've been holding finally cracks. She kept her hand on mine. She said, "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" I said, "I didn't want to be a burden." And she said, "You're not a burden. You're my father." It was the simplest thing. But I hadn't heard it said out loud in a long time, and I hadn't realized until that moment how much I'd needed to. The manager came over then. His name was Phil. 50s, grey at the temples. The kind of man who'd worked in restaurants long enough to read a table from across the room. He'd been watching, I think. He came over quietly and crouched down slightly the way people do when they want to talk without making a scene. He asked if everything was all right. I said we were fine, thank you. He said, and I didn't expect this, he said that he'd overheard some of the conversation, and he wanted me to know that the dinner was on the house, that they were returning what I'd prepaid. He said it with the kind of matter-of-fact dignity that good people have, the kind that doesn't ask for credit. I started to protest. He said, "My father had Parkinson's, 12 years. He passed 2 years ago." He looked at me directly. "You let people help you. That's not weakness, that's just sense." I don't have words for what that felt like. I've tried to find them 100 times since. I'll just say it was the kind of small kindness that lands harder than you expect because you weren't braced for it. Brendan said nothing for a long time after Phil left. He was looking at the table. His ribeye was half finished, the good wine nearly gone. Then he said quietly, without the polished affect, "I didn't know about the Parkinson's." I said, "I know." He said, "I've been," and then he stopped. Started again. "I've been treating this like a transaction. You and Tara like something to manage." He said it like a man reading back something he'd written and hearing it for the first time. That's not okay. I didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't entirely fine. But I appreciated that he said it without me having to ask him to. Tara drove me home that night. Just her. Brendan took his car, said he had some things he needed to think about, said it without resentment, just honestly. She sat with me in my living room for 2 hours. We didn't turn on the television. We just talked, really talked, the way we used to before her life got complicated and mine got quiet. She asked me everything I should have told her months ago. How the tremor had started, just in my right hand, barely noticeable at first, like a vibration I thought was the washing machine. What Dr. Hollis had said about the timeline, the medications, the things we'd need to plan for. She took notes on her phone, not in a clinical way. In the way of someone who is making a list of ways to show up. Before she left, she hugged me in the doorway the same way she used to as a little girl. Both arms, face pressed into my shoulder. She said, "Every Sunday, Dad. I'm coming every Sunday. I don't care what's happening at the practice." I said she didn't have to do that. She said, "I know I don't have to. That's not the point." I stood in the doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the block. The night was cold. The gutters were still broken. The water heater was still making its sound, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, more like the way the air feels after a long rain. Cleaner than it was. Still cold, but cleaner. The following Sunday, Tara came over with a rotisserie chicken and a board game she'd bought at the thrift store. An old edition of Trivial Pursuit, with the questions so outdated they'd become accidentally funny. We played at the kitchen table for 3 hours. She won, which she has always done by remembering things no reasonable person should remember. At some point, she told me that she and Brendan had talked. Really talked, she said. Not the kind of conversation they'd been having for the past 2 years, the logistics kind, the scheduling kind. She said Brendan had admitted he'd been under a lot of financial pressure with the practice expansion, and that it had made him hard to be around. She said she'd told him that was something to work on, not something to explain away. I didn't ask more than that. That's their marriage, and Tara is a capable woman. What I'll say is that Brendan called me the following Tuesday. He asked if he could come over Saturday, whether I needed any help around the house. I said the gutters could use looking at. He said he'd bring a ladder. He came. He spent 4 hours on those gutters. Didn't make it into a production, just did it. He declined lunch but accepted coffee. Before he left, standing on my front porch with his coffee cup, he said something I didn't expect. He said, "I want to get this right, with Tara and with you. I know I've been making it harder than it needs to be." I said I appreciated that. He said, "She talks about you differently than I ever talked about my own father. I noticed that a long time ago, and I think somewhere I resented it instead of learning from it." He looked at the middle distance the way men do when they're being honest about uncomfortable things. That's on me. It wasn't an apology that solved everything. I'm not going to tell you the story has a perfect ending, because life doesn't work that way, and I've lived long enough not to pretend otherwise. There are things that take time. The Parkinson's is real. The future has variables I can't see from here. But I have my daughter back. Really back. Not just in the scheduling call sense. And Brendan and I have something we didn't have before, which is at least the beginning of honesty. 3 months after that birthday dinner, Tara started helping me organize the paperwork for the things we'd need to figure out eventually. Powers of attorney. Medical directives. What happens? With the house when the time comes. It's not a fun conversation, but it was a real one, and we had it together, with all the information on the table, and nobody talking around anything. I think about that night at the steakhouse sometimes. The envelope in my pocket. Phil, the manager, crouching down and telling me about his father. Tara's hand on mine. I used to think the hardest thing about getting older was the body, the disc, the tremor, the list of things that don't work the way they used to. But it's not the body. The hardest thing is learning to say I need help before you've run out of road. I waited too long. I don't want you to do the same. If you're watching this and there's someone in your life you've been keeping at arm's length because you didn't want to be a burden, call them. Tonight. Don't wait for a birthday dinner at a steakhouse in Beaver Creek. Don't wait until someone has to pull out an envelope to make the moment real. Just call them. Tell them the truth. That's what I should have done 4 months earlier. It cost me some pride to learn it, but Tara came over last Sunday with chicken and a board game, and she's coming again next Sunday and the one after that. And right now, that's enough.